And we're back for episode 2 of Test Driven Laravel. Before we get started, I did want to show you how we can upload our project to GitHub. You may already be familiar with this, but a lot of this project again has to do with how I treat my workflow every day. So let's head over to Chrome, and I am logged into the GitHub page for Coder's Tape. I'm going to hit new for new repo, and we're simply going to name this library. And description for now we'll leave blank. We'll make this a public repo, and we'll just go ahead and create a repo. Now remember, we did already initialize our repository right here, right? If we run get status, obviously we do have a repo already. So with that, we need to follow this step right here. Push an existing repository from the command line. So what this first line is going to do is it's going to set our remote server. Because right now, if we do get push, it says, well, where am I pushing? I don't know where to push your code. So that's what this line is going to do. It's going to set the remote to that GitHub repo that we just created. Now that alone doesn't do anything because of course we need to actually push. So what this push will do is match our master branch up to GitHub. So let me go ahead and push that change. And now if we go back to Chrome, hit refresh, there we go. Our project is now up on GitHub. Now this project is available up on GitHub. So as you can see here, we have all of the commits that we created from the first video. And of course you can go back into this as it is a public repo, and you can check out each step that we've taken throughout this project. So keep that in mind throughout the rest of the episodes. All right, so let's head back here. And the very first thing I want to do is I just want to run all of my tests, and everything is passing. Let's continue working on that book reservation test that we've been working on since lesson 1. So let's open up the book reservation test. And let's see. So we have a book can be added to the library. And actually from the previous episode, we did leave this without exception handling. I believe we can get rid of that and we can run all of our tests and we should still be green. We're not really bubbling up any exceptions anymore, so we don't need Laravel to not handle those for us. All right, what else do we have? So we have, of course, what we were doing in terms of validation. And lastly, we do have this update. So we are able to hit a patch endpoint with the ID of the book, and we're able to update our book. So what's next? Let's go ahead and say a book can be deleted. That would be sort of the next step. So also actually with this test here, I can get rid of that line as well. Let's check that out. Yep, we're still green. Now the error that we got here is just the fact that we have a blank test. So don't worry about that one. So let me go ahead and basically do a lot of the same stuff that I have here. So let's do the post request so we can add a book to our database. Then let's go ahead and fetch that book. And then let's submit a delete request to /books/bookid. And with that, we should be able to delete that request. So what can we do? Well, how about this? Assert count of 0 if I fetch all of my books. That makes sense? Now, one thing we can do is we can add an interim check right before we hit the delete. So that would look something like this. We can actually copy this line. And what I can do is I can assert a count of 1. That way we know that this route did in fact add a book into our database. However, really this is already proven up here in this initial test. So it's not really necessary. This is really up to you. Do you want to do that or not? That's up to you how you write your tests. So this would be a really explicit way of us verifying the fact that this was added, because otherwise the assert count could have been 0 all along, say if we didn't actually do that. As a matter of fact, if we don't have anything like this, I think this test would actually even pass. Let's check it out. Yeah, you see this test passes and we're really not doing anything. As you saw here before, I actually erased everything. So what this will do is once I add this line, now this test will fail. So that's what this line is doing. That line is making sure that we are in fact passing right before we actually perform the action. Obviously, two different schools of thought on this, on whether you should do that or not. A lot of folks will tell you, well, if your first test passes, right, which would be kind of our book can be added to the library, so then there's no reason to question whether this code here would actually add a record to our database. But again, entirely up to you if you want to do that. All right, so let's go ahead and run this test, and let's see what kind of errors we get. Whoops, there we go. All right, so obviously we're having the same issue we've been having all along, which is that we are not getting the fact that this route right here doesn't even exist. So as we've done before, let's do without exception handling and run the same test again. And sure enough, now we get that the delete method is not supported by that route. So let's support that route by duplicating this, and let's make that a delete request, and we're gonna hit the destroy method. All right, let's check out our error now. And now we get books destroyed does not exist, of course, in our books controller. So let's go to books controller, and let's add a destroy method. Actually, that would be up here. So I like to keep my public methods up at the top, and then any helper methods will actually go underneath. So we'll add a public method for destroy. So obviously at this point, I would have to go ahead and say, well, I'm going to need my book, and that's going to be passed in through the route. All I need to do here is say book, go ahead and delete. All right, let's run the test. And sure enough, we are passing. Now here's one thing we have not really tackled, so I want to go back and backfill a little bit. So obviously up until this point, if we take a look at all of these tests, for example, let's take the deleted test for example. Yes, we are asserting that the correct action got taken place in our database, but what about redirections? Where should you be going after you are deleting a record? Well, I think you should go back to the index method, right? And we don't really have that one just yet, but we could say something like this. So once we hit the delete, then I do want to make sure, of course, that we don't have any books in our database left. But I also want to make sure that we are redirected. And where do we want to be redirected to? Probably to /books, meaning just the index method of /books as a GET request. So now our test is going to fail again because we're obviously not redirecting. So let's go ahead and add that to our controller here. So we're going to delete. And then let's go ahead and return a redirect to, and you could either say books right here, or of course we could use a named route, which eventually we'll probably switch over to. So now we're passing for that one. Let's check out what other methods we can do that in. So a book can be updated. So if you update a single record, I think it would make sense for you to get redirected back to the details page or the show view of that method. So let's say here response assert redirect, and where should we be going to? We should be going to /books and then the ID of the book. So let's just go ahead and say book, and this is going to be ID of 1. So yes, theoretically you could just say /1 and that wouldn't be a problem. It's up to you sort of how you want to do that. So a book can be updated. Let's run just that test, and we failed. All right, let's go back here and let's go to the update. So after you're done updating that record, let's go ahead and return a redirect back to /books/ and then we need the book ID. Fair enough. Let's run the test again, and we are passing. All right, let's finish up here by going to the first method here where we can add it to a library. So after you're done doing that, I definitely do want to make sure that we are redirected to /books/ again the ID of the book. So we don't have a book here just yet because we created that route, so we'll actually have to grab the book somehow. So we'll say book, give me your first one, and then now we could just say book ID. Oops, there we go. All right, so let's run this one test again. And we are failing because of course we're not doing the redirection. And so let's go back to our controller, and we're going to need basically this exact same thing that we have here. Now, where are we going to get book from? Well, as it turns out, the create method will actually return us back the instance. So why don't we save that to book, and then we can use book right here to actually redirect. Does that make a pass? Nope, it does not. So we got a 302 and it did not match the 200. All right, let's see what happened here. So we got a redirect, which is a 302. Right here. So initially we were asserting that we were getting a response of OK. I really don't need to do that if I am asserting that I'm getting a redirect. So I think that'll make it pass. And let's run the whole suite. Yep, and everything is passing. All right, so now in a green state, let's do some quick refactoring here. So one cool thing that I like to do is, so a book, right? So if we have an instance of book should be able to redirect us to itself. And what I mean by that is I just want a quick little helper in my book model where I am able to just say, go ahead and give me the path to you. Since you are a model, you should be able to know where it is that you are located at. So with that in mind, let's go to the book model, and in the book model, let's add a new public function, and I'm just going to call it path. Now this is very common for me. I do this on every single model. That way I don't have to worry about how to construct each one of these every single time, because truthfully we can actually grab this, and right here in this little method we can say return. Instead of book, of course, this is this because we are inside a book instance. And so now what we could do is if we have a book, then we can actually rewrite this as book path. And that will give me the path to this book. It's that simple. Let me run my test. Yep, we're still green. So let me go ahead and perform that refactor throughout my entire controller. And this is kind of the beauty of being able to have tests. I can go back, recheck my test. We're still passing. Let's keep refactoring. How about this one here? Obviously this one is back to just the source, so I can't really use the book itself. But that's okay. We were able to change the edit and the store view with that little path. Now the nice thing with this is if tomorrow I decided that from now on my address will maybe look something like the ID, and then maybe I want a slugified version of the book title. How about that? So we'll have the ID, then I want to have a dash. And then why don't we add str as the helper, that's illuminate support, slug. And then what are we going to slug? This title. So that would look something like, you know, /books/1, and then maybe dash, and then let's think of a book name, Ender's Game, for example. That's what my address would actually look like. Making that change right here in my path, would that break my test? Let's find out. Yes, it does. And the reason why it does is because we are actually expecting an actual string. So we should probably maybe change that in our test. This will make my tests a little bit less brittle. So let's do the same change right here that we did. And I'm actually just going to copy this anywhere that I find it. And I'm just going to say book, give me your path. All right, let's see now. Now we are failing, but we are failing not because my tests are failing, but because I actually do need to accept that in here. So let's say we're going to have a book, but then there's going to be a dash, and then maybe let's just say I am going to have the slug. How about that? Does that make my test pass? Almost. So we have cool new title, line 66. All right, let's check that out. Let's go back here. Let's go to line 66. So we are redirecting to book path. However, when we perform the patch, this book right here is not being fetched again. So when that happens, we need to actually grab a fresh copy of this because we grabbed it before we actually did the patch request. So what we're going to have here is still old data. Of course, my old title is still going to be here. However, if I run fresh, that will actually go out to the database, grab the record again, and I think that will make my test pass. And it does. So now my tests are a little bit less brittle because, again, instead of just using a hard-coded path, I am using the same path helper as we are using. So this is another one of those. It's a choice. You can, of course, not do this refactor and keep your actual paths. That's entirely up to you how you want to do it. Now for me, I am going to revert a little bit of this, not all of it. Let's get rid of the slug section, and then in my model, I will actually just do this ID. Are my tests still passing? Yes, they are. So how awesome is that? We were able to go down a rabbit hole, figure out if we were going to like it or not, having our test to back us up and say, are we still green? And if we are green, then we're good to go. If we're not green, then you know something is not quite right. But we go down these refactor paths. Sometimes they're successful, sometimes they're not. Sometimes we want to go back and say, you know what, maybe that was not the correct path. Let's start over. But you still have your tests to back you up in saying, yes, this implementation and this other implementation both do the exact same thing and meet the requirements of our application. That's the beauty of tests. So let's keep going. Let's keep rolling through these. So what else can you do? Well, first and foremost, I actually don't need that without exception handling anymore. And sure enough, we're still green. So I was initially going to do book reservation test altogether, and that's why I named that. I will actually just refactor this, and let's rename that test to book management test. I think that'll be a better title for it. Let me run all the tests. Yep, we're still passing. We're good to go. Let's make a new test. How about PHP Artisan make test? Make test. And what's the test going to be? Well, the test is going to be the author management test. How about that? Let's go back here. All right. Let's delete this and let's add a new test. How do we want to handle this? Well, what about this? We're still going to need to be able to do everything an author needs to do. So we probably still need a controller and a model and all of that. So why don't we start there? But however, we still need to connect these two tests at some point. So let's say an author can be created. So let's say this post. So if we do a post request to /author with some data, and maybe the data will be the name. We'll just say author name. And just to keep it simple, maybe we'll just say their date of birth. A little bit of biography stuff. So for this, we'll have a date here. So this date obviously will need to be a Carbon instance. So we're going to learn a little bit about how to cast something into a Carbon instance. And that's why I'm choosing to go this route. All right, so if we hit that endpoint, then of course I want to assert the count to be 1 in my authors table if I fetch all the records. Obviously author does not exist just yet. So we're going to get a couple of errors here. Now, as before, let's go ahead and disable exception handling. And last and not least, let's go ahead and refresh our database, right? That way we do have a clean database. All right, let's see what we have. So first and foremost, of course, that route doesn't exist. Let's take care of that. Back here, let's add a whole new section of routes here. Post route of /author. And we're going to hit an authors controller at store method. Great. Let's make that now. So PHP Artisan make controller authors controller. Let's run our test again. And so obviously we're going to get that the store method does not exist in authors controller. All right, back to PHP Storm, authors controller. Let's make a new public function store, and let's run the test again. And so we get that this author class that we're trying to fetch does not exist. We know that's a model. So let's go ahead and say PHP Artisan make model author. And I do want a migration with that. So now that we have that, we need to go back here into our test and make sure that we actually import that class. So I'll import the app author class, and that is up here at the top. And let's run the test again. All right, so finally we do get to here and say, you know what, that does not exist. All right, so let's go into PHP Storm and let's pop open this controller and let's do some work. So let's do it the way that we always do. Let's go ahead and grab our author, the app author, and let's go ahead and try to create an init. Here's another trick. I could do it the other way that we did it, but here's also another trick. You can grab the request and then you can say only, and to only you can pass in an array. So let's say only give me the name and the date of birth. So that will ensure that we are not passing the entire request, but rather just these two things. Now, of course, we're going to get a mass assignment error. And it's going to say something like fillable must be, there we go, add name to fillable. So, of course, we go into our author model. And let's go ahead and set guarded to an empty array. Go back here, do it again. And now we get, of course, author has no column named name. Of course, we created our migration, but we didn't do anything with it. Let's go ahead and create that now. All right, so we're going to have a table string for the name. And then we're going to have a timestamp, and it's going to be date of birth. We know that. All right, so let's go back here, run that again. And sure enough, we are getting green. Okay, a couple of things that I do want to check. and that is related to that date of birth. Of course, nothing special about the name of the author. That's just a string, nothing to see there. But what I really want to know here is the following. This assert instance of, I want to make sure that that date of birth is coming back as a carbon instance, meaning that we are properly parsing that as a date. So how do we do that? Well, we use this assert instance of, and let's say carbon class. Now carbon is being imported up here as carbon. So I want to make sure that if I fetch my author, and you know what, we could do this in two ways. We could either save this right in line here, that would work, or of course we could just take this out of here. So let's do that route. I think it'll be a little cleaner. So we'll open that, and then here we'll say author. So right here, if we grab our author, and then we grab the first one, right, because this is actually going to be a collection. So if we grab the first one, and then we grab their DOB, or date of birth, then I expect that to be an instance of carbon. So of course, this is going to put us back in the red. And there it is. So it says that, of course, I failed asserting that this string that you gave me is actually an instance of carbon. So check this out. This may be a totally new thing for you, but if we go to the author model, there's this protected dates, and this is actually equal to an array. So if you have several columns in your database that you want Laravel to automatically cast them into carbon instances, the same way that updated at or created at works, you could put them inside this protected dates. So let's add DOB to this. Let's check out our test now. So now we're going to get something about the fact that it's not properly being formatted, right? It says unexpected data found. Unexpected data found, data missing. So everything kind of blows up a little bit. And a lot of it actually has to do with the fact that, yes, we are trying to fetch and put a date in it, but we're not telling Laravel how that date is formatted. We need to be able to format that. So we need a way of hijacking when that creation happens, and we need to tell Laravel what we're actually doing. So check this out. If we run right here, there's a whole set of mutators and setters that Laravel has, and they follow a very specific naming convention. So if you follow the same convention, then it will work for any field that you have. So check this out. Let's make a new public function for set DOB attribute. By doing set and then your column name, it is a little bit weird in this one because DOB is not a word. But if it were a word like admin, then of course this would look something like this. Even though in the database, I know it would not have a capital A. So we're going to say capital DOB. Now this will accept the attribute. You can call it attribute, or we could just keep it simple and say date of birth, since we know that's going to be. So then we can say this, we can actually write right into attributes. And attributes is in our model, and attributes is an actual array. So we'll say date of birth is actually going to be, and then what we could do is say carbon. Now of course we'll import carbon again, use carbon, and then let's use parse. Let's let carbon kind of figure out what we want. So go ahead and parse the date of birth. All right, let's run our test again and see what we get now. And there we go. Now we get green. So that allows us to do something like so. So back in my author's test, I know this is May 14th, 1988. So we can actually grab this and say, all right, just to confirm that the correct date was actually parsed, let's assert equals, and let's put it in a different format. Let me maybe say 1988/14/05. Obviously a very weird, but it will prove that it is actually being parsed correctly. So now let's grab the author variable and grab the first one, and then grab that DOB. But now this is a carbon instance, so I can say format, and in here I can pass a string of anything that I want. So how about this? Capital Y, it will be a 4-digit year, slash, and then it's the day, so lowercase d, and then we need a month, so lowercase m. Let's run our test and see what we get. Sure enough, we still properly are able to format that date. So that is the way that you would be able to handle a date in our database. So this is the proper way of testing it, where we are asserting that first that we are getting that carbon instance, and then just as a reassurance test, you can reformat it to a different format just to make sure that the date got properly parsed. So that would be the way to do it. So we'll wrap it up for this lesson. Let me go ahead and do some commits to push up to GitHub as we've done before. And so let's see here. Let's start with our book. What changes do we make here? Well, we added this new path. So let's go ahead and make a commit for that and said adds new path to books resource. All right, what else do we have here? Why don't we commit all the author stuff together? So we know that. We know it's going to be our test. So let's just say adds author resource. So then we have the books controller. Let's go ahead and add that along with the test and the fact that we renamed the test. Work in progress for books resource. And finally, let's go ahead and create that authors table. Now we probably should have put those together. That's okay. So now that we have that set up, we can just hit push origin right here. And now if we head back and we hit refresh, we should be able to see all of our commits. And so there it is. So we have successfully added 4 more things. Now, of course, we are nowhere near done with this. We also need to hook up these new authors into our books. So in the next lesson, we're going to be talking about how to combine these 2 new resources that we have.